a sea of shining jewels. That's what it's like standing up here looking out at all of the happy, smiling faces of all of you. And after such a glorious week of meditations and chanting and inspiration and divine fellowship, and as I was thinking about that today, how unique it is that we have thousands of Kriya yogis here. And so I went to the autobiography of a yogi, and the very last words that Master penned in his autobiography read such. He said, "The blessed role of Kriya Yoga in East and West has hardly more than just begun. May all men come to know that there exists a definite scientific technique of self-realization for the overcoming of all human misery. In sending loving thought vibrations to the thousands of Kriya yogis scattered like shining jewels over the earth, I often think gratefully, Lord, thou hast given this monk a large family." And Master, in his omnipresence, in his omniscience, he is here sending his loving thoughts to all of his devotees. And it's such a privilege to be here and to share in Master's spirit and in his vibration. Because where else do we find such a great teacher, a God-realized soul who has brought a path, a how-to-live path, very practical and also very profound, with definite techniques by which we can achieve the supreme purpose of life. And that perfectly balanced life, too, that Master has given to us in all of his teachings. Meditation and serving mankind, right activity. That is what self-realization fellowship is. Realizing ourselves, realizing what we truly are, the soul, that spark of infinite spirit. And then divine fellowship with all souls whom we meet in the world. This is self-realization fellowship. Perfectly balanced path to find God in this lifetime. I'd like to begin our class this evening with an affirmation. We talk a lot about meditation and the importance of meditation, and also in his teachings, Guruji has given us a wealth of affirmations for all different overcoming, all different aspects of life and physical health, in our relationships, in solving problems in life. And these affirmations he's given to us, when we repeat them, we are repeating truth. We may not realize it at the moment, we may not know it, but we are repeating truths. And the more and more we repeat these truths, the more we begin to feel them, and then we realize in our own daily lives. So just for a moment, if you would close your eyes and repeat after me this affirmation that Guruji has given throughout his teachings. So repeat after me. I am calmly active. I am actively calm. I am a Prince of Peace, sitting on the throne of poise, directing the kingdom of activity. In this one affirmation, Guruji has given us so much. It really encompasses our whole life. To be calmly active in all of our various duties and responsibilities that our karma and God have given to us, to be calm, to be focused, to be attentive, never to be disturbed, and then to be actively calm. Actively calm meaning in meditation, we are alert, we are focused, we are concentrated. And then to visualize this beautiful thought that I am a Prince of Peace, sitting on the throne of poise. And Master gives us these affirmations to impinge upon our consciousness that we are a Prince of Peace, that God is the King of the universe, and each one of us, as His children, are princes of peace. And so if we can visualize this and feel it, that in all of our daily activities, that I am a Prince of Peace, sitting on this throne of poise, directing all my activities in life. What a wonderful way to go through life. And we need to have these reminders because life is pretty tough at times, isn't it? The struggles, the challenges, the trials that we undergo, all of these things in the school of life have but one purpose: to bring out the hidden soul qualities within us so that we can manifest in our lives perfect peace, poise, calmness, compassion, forgiveness, courage, and faith. And so that is the purpose of going through all these experiences in life. But we know in order to, as our class tonight is talking about becoming a giver of these things, first we must feel them. We must experience them within our own beings. And that is why meditation comes first. Meditation comes first because we can't give peace. We can't give love. We can't give joy to other people unless we are feeling it within our own beings. And this is what meditation does for us. We learn to get in touch with that which we truly are. Nothing that we have to acquire outside of ourselves. It's already within us. We are these princes of the universe. We just have to realize it again. And the beautiful thing about these teachings, and all great teachers down through the ages, they don't teach just by lectures and words and writings. Principally, they teach by the example of their lives. And we see in Master's life, throughout the autobiography of a yogi, it's filled with lessons that we need to apply in our own lives. And the great ones have gone through all the experiences that we have gone through and are going through and will continue to go through. And they come here to show us how to behave, how to act in this world. And Master, of course, was an avatar, but he had to deal with all kinds of challenges. But he got to the point where, as he said, I killed Yogananda a long time ago. God was living in him, and he was able to feel that presence of God flowing through him, and he could perceive that same image of God in everybody that he met because he had that infinite Christ consciousness, where he was aware of every atom in creation. He was one with everything and everybody. And so he was able, from that state of consciousness, to put into practice the two greatest commandments that Christ gave and that Master taught and lived in his own life. And that is to love God with all of our heart and soul, our mind, and our strength, and to love our neighbor as ourself. Master embodied that because he saw the image of God in everybody that he met. And really, that is the essence of what we're going to be talking about tonight. Becoming a giver is to first perceive that image of God within us, and then to serve and love and to be kind to that same image of God and everybody that crosses our path in our daily life. It is God helping God. It is God loving God. Guruji said in a lecture one time, Christ told each of us to love thy neighbor as thyself. But without soul knowledge, by which you realize that all men are indeed thyself, You cannot follow Christ's command. To me, there is no difference among men because I see each one as God's child. I can't think of anyone as a stranger. Isn't that a beautiful way to go through life? To see God in everybody, that there is no stranger to us? What a wonderful way to go through life. And in that same lecture, Master was telling a story about once when he was in New York, and 3 hold-up men surrounded him. And so he took out his wallet and he said, "Do you want money?" And Master said he was in a superconscious state. And so the men didn't reach for the wallet, and finally one of them said, "Beg your pardon, we can't do it." And they ran away. He didn't even have to say anything. He was offering them the money. But they were aware of that presence of God within him. He said another time he was in New York, he had just given a lecture in Carnegie Hall, and he said a man approached him with a gun. Now, I hope you don't get the image that all New Yorkers are like this. No, because I've been to New York. I know a lot of New Yorkers. They're wonderful, beautiful people. I think it just so happened that there were a few men in New York at that time that needed to be healed by Master. So this man walked up to Master and he had a gun. He said, "Do you know I can shoot you?" And Master said, "Why?" He said, "My mind was on God." And the man said, "You talk about democracy." And Guruji said that obviously the man was a mentally disturbed person. He said, "We stood for a few moments in silence, and then the man said, 'Forgive me, you have taken away my evil.'" I mean, this is the essence, this is the epitome of being a giver of peace, just through Master's consciousness. Guruji said, "Those who are in tune with God can change men's hearts." That's what we want to more and more do in our own lives, to change men's hearts. Now, I have a story similar to Master's on a little different level. It was shortly before I entered the ashram, and I was living in Venice Beach. Venice Beach is a little city not far from the Lake Shrine. And I had been attending Lake Shrine for some time, and it was a Saturday, and we had an all-day retreat at the lake with some classes and meditations. And I was still relatively new on the path. And we finished the retreat with a 3-hour meditation. And I was feeling pretty peaceful. I was feeling like a Prince of Peace. And so after the retreat, I got into my VW bug and drove back to Venice Beach, parked across the street from my apartment, and as I was getting out of my car, a couple of really big burly guys approached me, and they said, "Do you have a match?" And I said, "No, I'm sorry, I don't smoke." And so the next thing I knew, one of them grabbed me, he had a knife to my throat. And the other one was going through my pockets, taking things out of my pockets, and he took out my wallet, took out the money, and he said, "Would you like your wallet back?" I said, "That would be nice." I had my precious grandfather's gold pocket watch in my pocket, but he didn't even remove that. He left it. So he just took out the wallet, took out the money, and he gave it back to me. And then as they were starting to walk away, and they said, "Now don't turn around." They didn't want me to see their faces. And I don't know what got into me, but I turned around, and as they were walking away, I just said, "God bless you both." I don't know what got into me. I walked across the street, I walked up into my apartment, and I started to shake uncontrollably. Now, I didn't change those men as Master did, but at least because I was remaining calm and peaceful, at least I didn't get killed. Master said, the self-realized yogi is a prince of peace, sitting on the throne of poise, directing his kingdom of activity, wholly devoted to God in heart and mind, sacrificing to him the fruits of all his actions. In a prime example of this, of sacrificing all one's actions to God and Guru, keeping the mind and the heart in God, was our beloved Sri Dayamata, who so perfectly followed Master, who so perfectly expressed his will in everything she did to serve his work. But she had her challenges too, especially in the early days, to build the foundation of this great work, and not everybody received her with open arms. They didn't realize who and what she was. And of course, you know that Master had gone to India in 1935 and 36, and it was his wish to return to India again, but it never turned out that he could return. But he had asked Ma to promise him that she would go back and look after his work in India. So she did. Ma went back in 1958. And when she got to India, she had realized that there were a number of devotees there that were pretty much ensconced in their own ways, because it had been so many years since Master had been to India. And she said that the vast majority of the devotees there received her wonderfully. But there was a small group that thought, who is this person anyways? It's an American and a woman to teach us about our religion and our tradition. And so there were a few that were against Ma. And so she said that I made up my mind that no matter what was said about me, I would never retaliate. And that is not my way, and it never will be. And so Ma said that one day after a severe confrontation with one of these people, she was going to give a talk, a Satsanga, to the devotees there. And so she went into her room and she sat in front of a picture of Guruji, which is always a good idea before you do anything. Sit in front of a picture of Master. Big one, little one. Look in his eyes, talk to him, ask for his guidance, ask for his protection. And Ma prayed deeply because she wanted to serve Master's work in India. She said, as my prayer deepened, his living image emerged from the photo. Guruji blessed me, and my soul was overwhelmed with the divine inspiration of his presence. So Ma went out to speak before that gathering in that inspired state of consciousness. And one of the members of that group that was against her had decided to stand up and walk out during her talk, thinking that maybe some of the others would follow suit. And Ma looked at that gentleman as he stood up, and she said, a wonderful thing happened. She said, looking at him, I could not see him at all. There was only the divine manifesting in that form. And then I knew what God was trying to teach me. Behold me in all, not only in those who love you. And she said, that consciousness has remained with me. And she said, from that moment, all those so-called enemies came over to Ma and they asked for forgiveness. And she said, from that moment on, she said, the work in India has grown in leaps and bounds. Because of that example that Ma set before everybody else. She would never retaliate. She would never speak against anybody else. But through her attunement with her guru, she was able to see that image of God and even that person who thought himself her enemy. And she was able to change him. Ma said, the moral is simply this. Empty the heart of wrong feelings. Let it be loving and forgiving. Don't reason, but that person has mistreated me. Everyone has had someone who persecuted him, We must expect that. But never allow the ill feelings or actions of others to embitter you. If you do, then you are lost. You will not be able to help yourself or them. Keep your heart free of malice no matter how anyone treats you, no matter what others do. If you give love, Ma said, you will have peace in your soul. And this is what we're all striving, to be peacemakers, to have that love as we strive to see other people. And Ma said that we can't avoid having people persecute us or misunderstand us or judge us. This is a part of life. And if we take it with a spiritually mature attitude and not retaliate and not hate, but to send vibrations of peace and love, then we too can change the hearts of others. We all go through difficult experiences in our lives, isn't it? Where we feel that life is beating us up. Whether it's the physical plane, mental, emotional, spiritual, relationships. But I'm convinced of this, that all of those difficult experiences that we go through are part of the school of life, and they are meant not to destroy us, but to help us. To help us to go deeper and deeper into our soul, to look for those soul qualities, to manifest and express them in our daily lives. Because you think about it, if you never had a serious illness, if you didn't experience what the flu or a serious cold was like, can you really have empathy for somebody that is going through a serious illness? Or if you haven't had a difficulty in some kind of relationship, can you really have compassion for somebody that's going through that? Or you know that if you've lost a loved one and you've gone through that experience of grieving, then we can reach out and help others who are going through that same thing. So the things that happen to us in life, the difficult things, are to bring out soul qualities like humility, compassion, courage. And if we take those tests in life with that attitude, then we will be growing in leaps and bounds spiritually. There is a story of a king. He was a ruthless king. He ruled in a very dictatorial manner. He taxed his subjects unjustly, and he thought of all of his subjects as just faceless pawns, that they really didn't have any feelings. And so this king one day went out on a hunting expedition with a number of his court. And as they were hunting, they were going further and further away, and the king got separated from the others, and he got caught in a dust storm in the desert. And this king was in the desert for several days. And after 3 days, the dust started to settle down, and his garments were all torn and shredded, and his face was disfigured and ripped up from fear and fatigue and the sandstorm and so forth. And he was lost. He couldn't find his way back to his kingdom. And so after a few hours, he ran into a tribe of nomads. And he said, "I'm the king." And they laughed. "Sure, you're a king." But they took pity on him. They gave him some water. They gave him some food. And they showed him the way back to the kingdom. So he went back to his kingdom, all disheveled and so forth. And he went to the gates of his palace, and there were the guards, his guards. And he said, "Let me in, I'm your king." And they couldn't recognize him. And they said, "Be gone, get away from us." He said, "No, I'm your king." He said, "Get out of here." And so the king left. And he went into the villages where his subjects were, and he began to see that these people, that his subjects, were very kind and loving. They gave him water to drink, they gave him food, they gave him shelter. And after some time, when he got into a little bit better shape, he was able to help others. He was able to give some others some bread and some water. He rescued a young child from a burning building. And his whole heart was changed. He said, these people are good people. So after some time of living with his subjects, he went back to his palace. And he looked in, and the first time he was there, he had seen that there was another king on the throne, ruling in the same harsh manner. And this time when he looked in, he saw that it was just an illusion, that king that was ruling in his stead was actually the angel of humility, to teach this king how to treat his subjects. So he had gone through a very difficult situation in his life, but it completely transformed him and how he was able to rule his kingdom. And the same thing with all of us is that those challenging situations that we go through help us to rule the kingdom of our lives so that more and more we can truly be a Prince of Peace sitting on the throne of poise. Master said, nobility of heart and a spirit of service, to be big enough to behave nobly in every situation and to serve all. These come as gifts of Christ consciousness. To serve all means to be conscious that you are in everybody, not just in one little body that you call your own, for we are all made of the one same omnipresent consciousness of God. You must begin to look upon others as an extension of yourself. It is myself that is suffering in that body. It is myself that is filled with happiness in that body. Service is one of the best investments for expansion of consciousness. Master said, as soon as we step outside of ourselves and serve somebody else, we are momentarily stepping into that omnipresent Christ consciousness. The God in me is loving and helping and serving the God in you. A woman and her daughter were driving home from church one day, and the little girl turned to her mother and said, Mommy, there was something that the preacher said today that confused me. And she said, what's that, darling? And she said, well, he said that God is bigger than us. Is that true? And the mother said, yes, of course that's true. God is bigger than us. And then the girl said, well, he also said that God lives in us, doesn't he? She said, yes, darling, God lives in us too. She said, well, if God is bigger than us and he lives in us, wouldn't he show through? Someone said, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. You think about that. Be kind, because everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. We don't want to be mean to somebody else because we have no idea what they may be going through in their life. There was a yogi that was sitting by the roadside praying and meditating one day, and he would open his eyes and he would behold the beggars and the impoverished and the crippled people walking by, and he prayed deeply to God. He said, Lord, how is it that a loving creator can see such things and do nothing about them? And then the yogi kept on meditating for some time in silence, and then after a while he heard God's voice. He said, I did do something. I created you. So that is the plan in his creation. We see so much suffering and turmoil going on around us. And we, especially being masters, shining jewels in this world, need to reach out and be kind. And it helps us. We grow and we expand. There was a well-known psychotherapist who was giving a lecture on mental health one day. And then he was answering questions from the audience, and somebody asked, what would you advise us to do if someone felt a nervous breakdown coming on? And the doctor said, lock up your house, go across the railway tracks, find somebody in need, and help them. That is the way, the therapeutic way to get over our own problems is to help someone else. There was a woman who was in a hospital, and she had just lost her only daughter. And the nurse was there trying to console her. And tears were streaming down the mother's face. You can imagine losing your only daughter. And nothing the nurse could say would console this woman. And after some time, the nurse said, did you see that little boy that's sitting across the hall by your daughter's room? Now that's a story. That little boy came with his mother from Europe several months ago. And the mother was brought into the hospital about a week ago from a one-room apartment. And they have no family here. And the little boy has been keeping vigil by his mother's side for the last week, hoping and praying that she would come out of the coma that she was in. Well, his mother passed away this morning, and it's my duty. I have to go tell this little boy that at the age of 7, he has no family. And so the nurse said, would you be willing to go over and talk to that little boy? And so this woman, who was just, the largest grief in her own life, had this opportunity. So she walked over, she put her arm around the little boy, she started to talk to him, and then she brought that orphan boy back to her own home. So 2 grieving souls were able to help one another to reach out. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, kindness in words creates confidence. Kindness in thought creates profoundness. Kindness in loving, kindness in giving creates love. So it must be in our thinking, in our words, and in our actions that we give that love to people, that kindness. The more and more we become peacemakers in this world, the more we see the good in others. And there's a beautiful story that I love so much, and you may have read it or seen it before, and it's a fable that's told in various fashions. But every time I read it or think about it, the message in it is very profound. And it's about a monastery that, after some years of having thrived in spirituality, began to decline. And there was no spirit there. And many of the monks had died off, and there were only a few elderly monks there. And they spent much of their time complaining and criticizing, and the spirit of the monastery had just been lost. And so the abbot was very concerned, and so he knew about a holy rabbi that used to meditate in a small hut in the nearby forest. So one day, the abbot went to the forest, and the abbot and the rabbi spent some time reading scripture, praying together. And then after a while, the abbot was ready to leave, and he said, do you have any advice that I can give to my brothers in the monastery? Because we are declining there, and there's no spirit. And the rabbi said, no, I really don't have anything to tell you, but one thing I'll say is that the Messiah dwells within you, within your monastery. So the abbot went back to the monastery, and the monks asked him how everything went. Did the rabbi say anything? And he said, the only thing he told me was that the Messiah lives within us. He is one of us. So the monks started to think about, well, it couldn't be brother so-and-so. He's, But no, there's some good qualities in him. But how about brother, what's his name over there? It couldn't be him. But he's got some wonderful qualities too. Or maybe it's our abbot. He's the most holy of us all. Maybe it's the abbot. And then each one began to think, well, maybe the rabbi thought it was me. Maybe I am the Messiah. And so gradually, as the days progressed, and they began to think of each one that perhaps the Messiah was in their brothers, or perhaps the Messiah was in myself. And their respect began to grow more and more for one another and for themselves. And the spirit began to grow, and the neighboring town began to come more and more to donate to the monastery. More young men came, and then the monastery was thriving again. And it's so beautiful because there is a deep truth in that. The Messiah does live within each one of us. Why do you think Guruji called his commentary on the Gospels, the second coming of Christ, the resurrection of the Christ within you? The Christ is within us, and we are here to resurrect that Christ consciousness within ourselves, to be able to perceive God within us and in one another. Master said, have only love in your hearts for others. The more you see the good in them, the more you will establish good in yourself. Hold the consciousness of good. The way to make people good is to see the good in them. But it's not always easy because we are put in situations in life whereby people push our buttons. They rub us the wrong way. We all think differently, isn't it? And that gives us an opportunity that for people who don't think like us, who don't believe the way we do, to expand our consciousness and to see the good within them. And Dayama was the epitome of this. She was, from her early years, she said that she was a peacemaker, even as a young girl. When young children were being bullied or picked upon, she felt it was her duty to protect them. And she said that one day Master said, you are a peacemaker. And she had to be to guide and lead this great work of self-realization fellowship. Because not everybody always would understand. But Ma was always striving to bring that peace and harmony. And then some years ago, Ma had asked for us to prepare a card, a 5x7 card, with a saying of Master and then her comments on it. And it was given to all the monastics, and I still have this card on my desk, and I look at it and read it every day. The quote of Master's is, if you all work together with love, harmony, kindness, and humility, this work will sweep the world. And then Ma comments, those are the qualities that are necessary for our spiritual growth and for the well-being and growth of SRF. If we follow these and live by them the best that we can, this work will sweep the world. For it is our actions, not our words, that will inspire mankind. May Master bless us all. And so I think about these words all the time when we serve together in the temples, or when you're in your centers and meditation groups or meditation circles. We work with committees. And we realize that not everybody's going to think the way we think. Not everybody's going to have the same solutions to problems that we have. And so we have to, as Ma's way was always get together and discuss, talk things out, never blame or criticize. And then she would always say, now what would Master do if he was here? What would Master want? And I often think about that. Think about that. When you're in a group, you're working together, trying to solve some problems. It can be in a SRF group, or it can be with your family, or it can be in your work. Wherever it may be. Think, what would God want me to do? What would Master do? And you think about that. What would Master do if he was sitting right here? Well, he is. He's omniscient. He is omnipresent. So when we're working together in groups, always have Master there with you. And there's never an excuse to be unkind to one another. Because then we are lowering our consciousness. And then we are not allowing the right solutions to come. We always need to be kind. Even in small ways, to be kind. William Wordsworth, the English poet, said, "That portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love." Those just little acts of kindness and love. The great pianist Arthur Rubinstein was always fascinated by audience reactions. So he was giving a concert one time, and it was an overflow audience. He had his piano on the stage, and they set up some chairs on the stage. And so some of the audience was sitting on the stage with him. He played the concert, he went behind the curtain, came out for an encore, several encores, and finally his last encore, he walked out, and he noticed that there was an elderly woman who was trying to get out of her chair on the stage, trying to get her coat on. So Rubinstein said, I'm from Poland, and we're taught to be kind to women. So he grinned and he said, "And I had the greatest ovation of my life, much more than for any of my playing, by helping this woman on with her coat." These little acts of kindness. Master said, "One of the greatest victories over the little self is to be sure of your capacity to be always thoughtful and loving, to be secure in the knowledge that no one can make you act differently. Practice this. The entire Roman government could not have roused unkindness in Christ." And one of the greatest gifts that we can give to others is to be present, to listen. Listening is a real art. One psychotherapist said, "To be in the present with someone else is a gift. The gift of attention is perhaps the most precious and envied of all, even though we do not always realize it. To be there, to be totally available." And you think about that when you've been with somebody and they've been totally attentive to you. I know that some of my greatest experiences, in the ashram we have spiritual counselors. And my counselor would very seldom give me advice. But whenever I would have a problem, something I was dealing with, just listening, and I could tell that he cared. He was totally with me the whole time. And he valued me. And I've noticed that in my own life too, that in counseling as ministers, we counsel oftentimes on all different subjects. And people sometimes bring their problems, and even if I don't say a word, at the end, the person will say, "Thank you so much. I feel so much better." Just by being there and listening. In our training, and years ago when the monks in training in speaking would be in our chapel on a Sunday morning, but whenever he was there, whenever he didn't have a temple service, Brother Nakulananda was always there, right in the front seat, totally attentive with a big smile. And I can't tell you what confidence that brings to one. Kindness and thought creates profoundness. Kindness in word creates confidence. When we express to somebody that we have confidence in them, that we admire them, that we value them, just by listening to them. Years ago, right before coming in the ashram, Brother Dharmananda was a minister at Lake Shrine. And one day he came to me and he said, "I want you to give the announcements. I want you to be the announcement reader." And I said, "Brother, no, please. Anything but that. I'll do anything." And he said, "No, it'll be good for you." And he knew because he didn't like public speaking either. So I said, "Okay, all right, I'll do it." So the first morning, the first Sunday service, I had to be the announcement reader. I was in my VW bug again, driving from Venice Beach to the Palisades, to the Lake Shrine, and I can't tell you how many times I thought I'd just keep on going up to Santa Barbara. Or turn around and go back. But brother told me, he said, all you have to do, and this was in the Windmill Chapel. And the minister had a lectern on one side of the chapel, and the service reader was on the other side, in front of the altar. And he said, just look at Lahiri Mahashaya's picture, because I was on the far left of the altar. And I tell you, I'd never really had a deep relationship with Lahiri Mahashaya until that Sunday morning. And so I was looking at the picture, and I can't tell you how many times that as I was driving there and thinking about going up to Santa Barbara, and I thought, anything is better than this, even getting mugged. But I knew that this was my duty, that I had to do it. So Brother Dharmananda began the service. He had the opening remarks in the service. And then he said, and now we'll have our announcements. And my heart was just pounding in my chest, and my knees were shaking. And Brother looked over at me and gave me this big smile, like, you can do it. And that was it. He had that confidence in me. And he was able, through that smile, through that look, I was able to get through that test. That is how we need to help other people. And Master was such a great listener. Remember, Dayama talks about Master. She said, when you were in Master's presence, you were everything to him. There was nothing else. You were his whole world. And Ma was exactly the same way. When you were with her, you were the most important person. You know, you've heard it again and again that the disciples would say, well, I was Master's favorite. Because he saw each one as his favorite disciple. Guruji said, when you feel like being alone, get away from people. Be by yourself. Do not keep company with people unless you are prepared to give them your full attention. In that regard, when I am with others, I mix with concentration, with attention, with love. But when I am alone with my God. And Master said, listen, learn to listen. That is the way to be attractive. You will see how your presence is in demand. So think about that. Take that as a homework assignment. Find opportunities to not necessarily give advice to people, but just to listen, to be there, to be attentive to them. Because, as Mother Teresa of Calcutta said, that the biggest disease today is not leprosy or tuberculosis, but rather the feeling of being unwanted. The feeling of being unwanted. She said there are many people that are hungering for bread, but the greater poverty is that people that are hungering for love. And that was Mother Teresa's life. She received that call from Jesus. He said, bring me into the slums, into the poor. Be there for me. She said, come, be my light. And so whenever she and her nuns would serve the poorest of the poor, the dying, the orphan, she would see that that was Jesus in disguise. That she was serving God and all those people. It is God loving God. And Mother Teresa had tremendous challenges, coming from a very comfortable order and to go into the slums of Calcutta to form the order. But she did so much because she relied on that presence of God. She said, I know God won't give me anything I can't handle. I just wish he didn't trust me so much. And then that kindness, along with that kindness, has to be love. There has to be love. A teacher was asking her pupils, what does loving kindness mean? And one little boy jumped up and he said, well, if I was hungry and somebody gave me a piece of bread, that would be kindness. But then if somebody put some jam on the bread, that would be loving kindness. So whenever we reach out to people with kindness, add the jam of the love. because it is that love that is the whole purpose of creation. Master said God is love. His plan for creation can be rooted only in love. And that love is so easily seen in young people. This is why Jesus said that when the children were going to come to him and the disciples were keeping the children away, he said, no, he said, suffer the little children to come to me and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God. Out of the mouths of babes comes wisdom. Some children were asked, what does love mean? And a little 5-year-old boy said, love is what's in the room with you at Christmas if you stop opening presents and listen. When my grandmother got arthritis, she couldn't bend over and paint her toenails anymore. So my grandfather does it for her all the time, even when his hands got arthritis. That's love. A little 6-year-old girl said, if you want to learn to love better, you should start with a friend that you hate. A little 4-year-old girl said, if you want to learn to love better, you should start with a friend you hate. But there are 2 kinds of love, our love and God's love. But God makes both kinds of them. A 4-year-old girl said, love is when your puppy licks your face, even after you have left him alone all day long. And finally, an 8-year-old girl said, you really shouldn't say I love you unless you mean it. But if you mean it, you should say it a lot. People forget. That's out of the mouths of babes. And then in talking about giving, talk mainly about giving kindness to one another, to people who cross our path, I want to just briefly mention the importance of giving our love to God. And Ma talks about this in Glimpses of a Life Divine, where she talks about love, and she said the greatest lovers in the world are not your Romeos and Juliets. The greatest lovers are those who have loved God, Jesus Christ, Buddha, Paramahansa Yogananda. Those are the greatest lovers of the world. And she said then, but we have to remember, we have to make the effort. You have to struggle to make the time for God. She said, most people take everything from God and take for granted that there's nothing more to life than just give me, give me, give me. I remember Guruji said once something that touched me very deeply. He said, everybody in this world is seeking something, and even God is seeking something. And that is, he owns everything in this universe. He owns us. He owns all the riches, all the wealth, all the wisdom, everything. But even he is craving something. And what is it? He is craving the love of his children. And Ma said that when she heard that, she said, let me make up for all those who have forgotten God. And she lived her life loving God, making up for those who are forgotten. And sometimes when the spiritual path gets a little bit tough, we may feel a little bit dry or not feeling like we're getting results. That's the time just to give, give, and give. Because everything that we utter to God, he embraces in his heart. It is not forgotten. So one final closing little story. Because Master was such a giver, he gave his whole life for this work, for all of us. He incarnated with but one purpose, to bring us back home to God. And he spent his whole life ministering and serving the devotees. And whenever they could, the devotees felt it was an honor and a privilege to serve the Guru. So on one occasion, Master said, you were all so kind to me with your many attentions. And one of the disciples said, oh no, it is you who are kind to us, Master. And then with a very sweet smile, Master said, God is helping God. That is the plot of his drama of human life. God is helping God. That is the plot of his drama of human life.